Washington's coaching staff is extremely confident in their revamped offensive line.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you're getting this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button down below. Click that little bell as well, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it all really does help the podcast out a lot. Now, Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. We're going to take some time at the very end to talk recruiting. Some big-time local targets have set up unofficial visits for game days this fall. We want to dive into a couple names you know, a couple names maybe you don't. So we'll get there in a little bit. We want to talk about Ryan Walters, who is extremely confident in what his defensive line brings to the table. But we'll get to that in a little bit, because everyone's biggest question, all the everydayers out there, have been asking us day in, day out, rightfully so, about the offensive line. I asked Jimmy Doherty about that today, and he said the depth, the talent, everything is so much better than it was a year ago, and he feels really good about where this group is ahead of 2025.
Yeah, when you go across the line from left tackle to right tackle, yeah, you might see three similar names for if you want to throw in Paki and, Guerin being a former player.
I was going to say two very similar names, and he's just say Landon and Guerin Hatchett, but
exactly. But when you just look across the line from left to right, everybody's back. But also you did strengthen every position where, getting Carver Willis was absolutely massive when you look back in hindsight and say, yeah, you might have liked John Mills. You might have liked giving Max McCree a bump. And Max looked good in fall camp, but I don't think he was ready to be a starting left tackle in the Big Ten. But you like the depth that he provides, which is why I'm so glad that you hit on Jimmy's comment about the depth, because that's where you have strength in numbers. You don't want to say, oh, well, we have this guy as our starter. It's, well, he can start, but we have an even better guy in front of him. And then you go down the line, Paki Finau and John Mills at left guard. Whoever wins that 60-40 battle, you don't care, because you're happy and both guys are going to hold their own. Landon speaks for himself. Guerin and, whatever Champ is able to do in terms of gaining that ground on Guerin and whenever that may come, because both you and I believe it will come at some point this season. But, there's no rush there, because, again, you're talking about bringing in a 6th, 7th year guy who can do a job for you, but will not hold back the freshmen that you clearly want to excel early on in their careers. And then I do think Drew Azzopardi has improved. I think, I was kind of a little critical on him last season, making that jump from San Diego State up to the Big Ten. You can never, in hindsight, look back and say, well, I should have given him more credit. No, I think everybody should have, me included in that. And I think he's done well this fall. But even behind him, that might be the one question mark on the line, where Zach Henning looked pretty good in fall camp and in spring at center. Like every position aside from right tackle. But I think at that point, if that is your biggest weakness, that means you have 9 offensive linemen, not 10, and you're more than happy with that.
And it's where, Maximus McCree as a swing tackle does come into play, where it's nice seeing him rep at both left and right. And it feels like, if something were to happen, knock on wood, at either tackle spot, he would be the first guy off the bench no matter the case. So that's something I'm really interested in there. But I want to talk about Drew Azzopardi, because this was something I think you touched on it perfectly, as Jimmy Doherty talked about it today at his press conference, where he does feel like Drew has improved a lot. And one thing that he touched on that I think is certainly very fair is he had started 4 games at San Diego State in 2023. And yeah, everybody loved his potential. That's why he was a 4-star transfer. And it's why he had so many offers from all over the West Coast to jump up a level. That being said, he was asked to do a lot on a really bad offensive line last season. Those aren't excuses, but it just kind of just shows what the problem was last year. Is a guy who was a group of 5 player. It's, when you look at D'Angelo Titiali at center, when an FCS player there, when those are the guys who are being asked to anchor your offensive line, like that's a problem. And we were sitting here saying, hey, maybe this guy will be better. Maybe this guy will be better. And we'll see those just steps forward last year. And we didn't. But now with a full year in the weight program, with a group that has been together since January, these are little things that we've tried to harp on as much as possible, but we wanted to continue to do so, because not only are we hearing the coaching staff say it, but it's also because we believe they're right. Oh, sorry. No, I wanted to add that when we look at those things, the chemistry, the strength, the size, everything is better. And it's all just kind of, I think Drew is a microcosm of all this when you look at every single position on the offensive line, because he does look bigger. He looks stronger. He looks more flexible, more agile. And we look at just everything that he brings to the table. And if he just takes a step forward, like the rest of this offensive line, from bottom of the barrel where they were last year to average, that's still a pretty significant jump. And for what Demond brings to the table, that's still going to ignite a huge improvement in this offense.
And I think it all stems from Michael Switzer, where he just seems a little more technically focused. That's not a knock on Brennan Carroll by any stretch of the imagination, because much like Belichick, the last name Carroll carries its own weight in water in the NFL and in college football. But to me, there does seem to be a little more onus on, refining the technique, really kind of honing in on 2 or 3 things that the guys do, much like Drew, very well. But my point is, because what we saw in fall camp was, the offensive line, they did kind of take a few bumps and bruises along the way, but it really did look like a unit that could hold their own. Whereas last season, we're looking at which one of these guys is going to be able to hold their own, not, as a collective unit, they can actually more than just do a job.
Right. And I don't disagree with what you're saying. I just think that when we look at the position that Brennan Carroll was put in last season, it's just so much different. And I'm not sitting here trying to make an excuse in any way, shape, or form. We're just looking at the reality of the situation, where you have 17 bodies that, from anybody, it's not just us saying this, from anybody who's been out there at practice. The first thing you look at, I saw some Washington State fans that were over on our Twitter when we asked for thoughts on the original depth chart, saying, wow, this team does look a lot bigger on paper. And you get out there and you look at it in person, you see it. These are things that are just so significant. And, we look at the John Mills, Paki Finau discussion too, the size that those guys bring to the table, the strength, the athleticism. It's all just so much different than what we saw last year. And it's why I've been harping so much on this as a collective unit, where I look at the Mills and Finau debate, no matter who it is, even if it is 50-50 through the first couple of weeks, I truly don't care, because we look at this group and both of those guys have taken so many reps with the first team through the spring, through the fall. And it's not the typical, if there are 2 guys there, you have none. No, it's both these guys are really talented, and they're both very clearly part of your long-term plan, like Jedd alluded to during his Monday presser, that you want to find ways to get them on the field as much as possible. And you're just so happy about what they bring to the table that you want to find ways to, again, just put them out there however you can.
I mean, it would be really coaching malpractice on both Jedd and Switzer's part, and Jimmy to a degree in that as well, if you didn't push both of them, because you could say, we have this young guy, Paki, John will give you, takes me back to the Roger Rosengarten era when he should have got started way more early in his career than he did, but that's for discussion for another day. And you look at Jedd, I think that's why, he was the perfect fit at Washington, because Washington is that school where you might need to play a little more freshman than some other Big Ten schools would. And Jedd's perfectly comfortable with that because of the talent evaluation that the staff does with Matt Doherty and company and everybody in the ops department. And Jedd just kind of being confident in himself, where he saw it at Arizona with Wendell Moy and Jonas Sabonet. You look at both of those guys. Obviously, you're not saying Paki and John Mills are going to be, carbon copies of them. But if both of them are on an NFL roster in 4 or 5 years from now, neither of us are surprised. And I think that's kind of the point that we're driving at, where you go and get one body type, but then it's not just the body type. It's not just getting a big, mauling guard where, you can go to any real high school up and down the West Coast and find some big offensive lineman, air quotes there for the audio listeners. But you look at it and say, they also got better talent. And I think that's the important thing. You didn't just get size and numbers. You got size and ability, and they just happen to be freshmen who look a little bit older.
No, absolutely. And that's the biggest thing here. I don't care about the experience right now, because the cohesiveness, the way this offense works, you are going to find ways to get better. And Demond Williams is such a big part of this, because his mobility, if you can just find ways to hold up for a little bit longer than you did last season, which again, is just all about these gradual improvements, you're going to take a big step forward in that department. And Lars, I feel like the defensive line is also primed for a big step forward. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off on organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. One thing that I was really surprised by Monarch was how much I was spending on things like food delivery, streaming services. Now that I've cut some of those down, I can afford an extra tub of protein powder and help hit some of my personal health goals, and it's been awesome. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONCollege. We've also got a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, my personal favorite, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app today by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Lars, we also got a chance to chat with Ryan Walters, as we will every week now from here until the end of the season, which we couldn't be more excited about. And I got a chance to ask him about his confidence in the defensive line. And one thing that he's harped on throughout the spring, throughout the fall, is that this is one of, if not the deepest group of just defenses in terms of talent that he's ever been around. We look at this defensive line depth chart. We're really happy about the way it unfolded with Anterio, Thompson, and Tevita Uiagalelei being listed as the starters. Just in terms of a four-man front, we fully expect Sione Pepa or Logan Sagapolu to slide in as a nose tackle in 5-down fronts. So just because you don't see him on the depth chart there as starters, don't panic. But I look at this group, and it's the same with the offensive line. If we just see gradual improvement, which I think we might see a bigger improvement from this group, just based on the depth, the experience, and just some of the talents that you brought into this group, combined with what Ryan Walters does, I'm really excited about where this unit is going.
For so many reasons, because you just mentioned a couple of names there, but you can also go down to Elinneus Davis, Omar Khan. There's the number of guys in that room, and you go out to edge with Hayden Moore, Isaiah Ward when he's healthy, Zach Durfee if he's able to stay fully healthy, from top to bottom along the front seven. And again, you can go to the secondary as well, but I mean, specifically talking about the defensive line here, Bryce Butler, another name where, again, whether he's on the depth chart or not, and the Parker brothers, when you get Javon back, Armon showed pretty well in fall camp. You just go down the list of guys, and it's a matter of, if you have so many guys, like we talked about, maybe you only have none or one. And it's not a case of that. It's especially in the Big Ten, you need the size, which they absolutely have now with, Sione Pepa, Sagapolu, and the list goes on and on. But you also have those hockey line rotations where when you're able to sub packages on defense and you have that fresh wave of the exact same size guys coming in, and whether it's a 4-down, 5-down, even if you want to throw in 6, get creative, whatever, probably not. But the point being that you have both the bodies and, kind of ability to change on a whim, drive by drive, series by, series within series. And I think without question, you didn't have that last year, but it's more than just the size. It's also their ability, because we saw, like we mentioned in the first segment, the offensive line wasn't world beaters in fall camp. Damon wasn't perfect. He was off structure a decent amount, especially towards that last week there, that at least we were able to see publicly. And to me, that can only mean good things for the defensive line.
I agree with you there. I will say the one thing is you don't need to necessarily have a bona fide, like outside of, when you have players at the talent level of Vita Vea, having a rotation on the defensive line is so helpful. And that's one of the things that really just held this team back last season, where obviously, it's a much different situation. It's not an excuse, but you look at the injuries, you look at the guys that they lost, whether it be to graduation, medical retirement, like Fatu Ituitele, the transfer portal, whatever else it might be. Like there were so many guys that you just lost last season that it hurt the depth of the unit as a whole. You asked Sebastian Valdez and Jacob Bandes to do so much. And it's where, playing in this new conference with how many teams are just going to ram it down your throat with a physical downhill rushing attack, it's just going to look so much different. And I think Jedd Fisch, did the best that he could with what was available to him last season, where obviously it didn't look great, but we've seen that emphasis, just take place through the transfer portal, through high school recruiting, where you got a couple of guys that are going to come in and contribute right away on the interior next season with guys like T.I. Lukais and Derek Coleman-Brusa. But we just look at where the unit is right now because those guys aren't here. And I just think it's a really nice step in the right direction because every single guy just does something a little bit differently. Like I just look at what Anterio Thompson brings to the table. I think that's the kind of guy with true high-end upside where if he just turns it on and unlocks the athleticism, the strength that he has, he's someone who can truly collapse the pocket from the interior. Uiagalelei has proven to be a really solid pass rusher from the interior. Elinneus Davis has really nice upside. Bryce Butler is someone who can shoot gaps against the run and just get after the quarterback a little bit. You've got a pair of just run-stuffing guys in Logan Sagapolu and Simone Peppa who can just do a really nice job for you holding two gaps in the middle while playing nose. And Armon Parker is a bit of an unknown. So same with Omar Khan, where he seems like a high floor run defender kind of guy. But the point is, I'm listing all these names and the one or two things that really stand out about them to me, because these are all things that matter in this conference. And if you don't have to throw Jacob Bandes out there for 40, 45 snaps a game, as was the case last year, I know he's not here anymore. If you don't have to do that, that is a major step in the right direction when, maybe you have one guy that takes 30 snaps a game. And that's fine if Anterio Thompson, Uiagalelei, whoever it is, they earn that. But you don't need them to do that anymore. And it, prevents injuries. It keeps guys fresher. It, puts opposing offensive lines in a tough spot when you're just rotating so often and you can just get a more consistent pass rush, which were just things we didn't see last season.
Except the one thing Ryan Walters did see is a Big Ten defense. And I think that's why if you're Jedd Fisch, you went to go get him. And I think looking at, in totality, what Ryan brings, where obviously you mentioned ad nauseum, the Dylan Tiedemann effect, where knowing how good he is with guys in the secondary, that's one thing. You already had a pretty good secondary coach in John Richardson, and then you added Taylor Mays. But bringing everything together with Jason Kapusi focusing solely on the defensive line and giving Aaron Van Horn that outside linebacker role, to me, I'm thinking like that all factors in together to where Ryan knows exactly how to build a Big Ten defense. He knows how to combat Big Ten offenses. And he knew that Washington had the talent. You just kind of had to go sprinkle in a handful of guys across the front seven to say, we need a little more depth. We like some of the young guys where if this is 2026 and we're talking about Omar Khan being in the two deeps, Armon or Armon Parker being a starter, like those are all things that wouldn't surprise us in the way too long prediction show. But when you look at right now in 2025, all those pieces fit together. It's just a matter of which one rises which week. But that's the perfect problem to be in where, like you mentioned throughout the show, Washington just wasn't in that position last year, and really they weren't even close to it.
We have an important request. Locked On wants to hear from you. We've put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcast even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't, and answer questions about our advertising. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes the survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes. Thank you so much for helping us out. And Lars, speaking of helping out, that's again what this defensive line is going to do. These rotations, you said it perfectly. Washington was just straight up not anywhere close to being in this position last season. And it's why you and I expect this team to take a huge jump forward this season. And so much of that does stem from what Ryan Walters is going to be able to do to unlock some of these guys. But it also just comes back to just natural progression and talent that you just didn't see last year, where if Elinneus Davis was there taking 35, 40 snaps a game as a redshirt freshman, maybe he's a little bit ready for a bigger role this season. But at the same point, maybe you stunt his growth and he doesn't look as good if, you put him out there for so many snaps at Iowa or Penn State and he just gets, run through by a bigger, more talented, stronger offensive line. Like there are so many different things where, yeah, it sucked last season, but if all of those things result in a better 2025, and I want to just kind of wrap this up with Armon Parker, who, as we alluded to on yesterday's show, didn't make the depth chart, but still looks like someone who can be a contributor this season. When you have a guy like that, and Omar Khan being another name you mentioned, who just didn't make the depth chart, but look like they can give you something in some capacity, that is a much better problem to have last season than it's, Sebastian Valdez looks like he could be a really talented player. And he's had a really nice preseason with the San Francisco 49ers, by the way. But you were asking him to do everything. and you just didn't have much else, especially after Javon went down, after Zach Durfee went down. There just wasn't much else on that defensive line that was going to contribute in a major way where, Isaiah Ward is more of a pure pass rusher at this point in time, which is something Jedd Fisch talked about last season. You still had those particular roles, but there were 4 or 5 guys. And now when combining outside linebackers and defensive linemen, you have 10, 11? It's just a much different case and a much better problem to have compared to where you were last year. And it's still a position that Washington really needs to focus on the recruiting trail. So let's talk about an under the radar 2026 guy who's going to be on campus soon. Right after a message from our good friends over at Supply House. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items for the most trusted brand in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. If you need parts for a project fast, Supply House's next-day delivery chain is a total game changer. The part finders, tools, and 3D schematics can save you hours on jobs where every detail matters, and their trade master perks like priority shipping and dedicated support make the whole process smoother. Join the free Trade Master program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use promo code SHCollege5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. Lars, as some of these prospects in 2026, 2027, 2028, as they start setting some unofficial visits to get out and see some game atmospheres and different things like that, there were a couple names that were really standing out to us. So we wanted to start with the class of 2026 and a 3-star edge rusher from Curtis High School in Tacoma who's committed to San Diego State. That's Robby Lavata'i, who I'm really interested in this kid. He's ranked as the number 8 player in the state of Washington by the 247 Sports Composite. He doesn't hold an offer from UW just yet, but you look at the tape and it's really interesting where it looks like a developmental edge rusher kind of guy. But when we look at Washington's class, yes, they have a 4-star edge rusher listed in Derek Coleman-Brusa, but that guy's not playing full-time edge. You look at his, we got to see him a couple of weeks ago out at fall camp. He's 6'6", closing in on 275 pounds. Like, that's a guy who, he's going to play some edge rusher and he's going to look really good there. But I wouldn't be surprised if he spends a good majority of his time at like 5-tech.
Yeah, he ain't closing in on 275. He's at least 275. Just, again, when you keen eye there looking at him, he's fully ready to go there. But I think it speaks to, when we talked about Victor Sanchez-Hernandez, when he committed, it's a long-term, you need to stack depth. And kind of what we're talking about in that last segment where you have the Omar Khans of the world, these younger guys where they're still not even breaking into the full mode year 2, 3 in the program. But that's okay because you still have that depth. So, you can trust your coaching if you have unforeseen injuries, which nobody wants to have happen. But you at least have the depth already built in the roster where you're not going in on a year in, year out basis to the portal saying, hey, we need to get another, veteran here who might not even play that much. That's why Jedd emphasizes high school recruiting so much. And this is a prime example because in-state kid, good talent. You trust the evaluation and the staff more so than anything else. And like you mentioned, they haven't offered, but I have a feeling if that offer comes, it'd be how quickly did D'Angelo commit between when he got that offer out of the portal?
Immediately.
Again, it would be one of those types of situations. And that's no such at SDSU, but let's be real.
No, it's just a step up. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing where, we've seen it more recently than that with Quade Carr too, where it's same thing where he was committed to San Diego State, gets the UW offer and is pretty quickly flipping where Robby, when you go and you just look at his posts on Twitter, he seems very interested in staying home, those different kinds of things, which certainly plays into this a little bit, but it's like what we were talking about with Tom Malu as well, where this is the kind of kid where it's probably going to take a couple of years for him to see the field consistently, where I like the tape. I think he's got really nice eyes. I think he's got a really explosive first step. He's got a couple of nice moves, but he's just not fully developed yet. And it's going to take a couple of years for him to continue to add weight, which all of these things are okay. Like, that's not bad when you think about a 3-star prospect who's, right around number 1,000 in terms of national rankings by the 247 Sports Composite. But you can afford that when you just kind of look at some of the guys ahead of him right now. And here's the best way to put this. When we look at the way, or just some of Washington's shortcomings in defensive line recruiting in this past class, it's a little bit more acceptable when you really like what Victor Sanchez-Hernandez, Caleb Smith, a guy like Robby, if you like what they're going to bring you 2 years down the line, it's a lot easier to go out and say, we don't need to go and find 3 defensive linemen like this, like the coaching staff needed to do this past cycle. Maybe you just need to find 2. You can spend a little bit more on a higher production edge rusher and a higher production defensive lineman when you like some of the guys that are coming up in the program a little bit more. Whereas, Omar, maybe Bryce Butler is still a year away from being a full-time contributor that can play 25, 30 snaps a game, where I still fully expect him to be in the rotation. But it's a little bit easier to go out and sell that with, these 1-year transfer mercenary kind of guys, which is fine. And it's a little bit more of a sustainable route to build instead of you need 3 or 4 defensive linemen every single year from the portal, which is just certainly not what this program wants to be. So let's stay along the defensive line though, because you and I we saw this come in. 2027's top player in state, 4-star defensive tackle, Tevita Nonu from O'Day High School here in Seattle. We saw that he's got 2 unofficial visits set up for this fall. One of them is to watch Washington take on Ohio State on September 27th. The other is to watch Washington take on Washington State in the Apple Cup over in the Palouse. And I feel like that's a little telling that he's pretty interested in staying on the West Coast.
I mean, you're not feeling Austin Joyner vibes. You're not feeling, I think, Bishop
I just remember when Savell
vibes.
Smalls put Washington State in his top 6. Obviously, I know, a lot of everydayers were not happy with the way that whole situation played out. But when he put Wazoo in his top 6, it was, oh, okay, I see where this is going.
Yeah, and Washington was the key school omitted in that list as well. It was kind of funny. Good times, great times. Don't even remember who the coach was at that point. No, but you just look at it and think, yeah, you like to see where they're at in this point in the process with a guy like Tevita. And knowing how you went with the O'Day guys this past year, we talked about that ad nauseum, where it's not necessarily a technical miss, but it is a perception miss. It is you just look at the paper and say you had these 5 guys in state and they all committed elsewhere and certainly to some Big Ten schools. And it's like, cool. Okay. Like that, we're cool with that. We would have loved to have them, but for various factors, they decided to go elsewhere. And I think that's okay when it doesn't become reprehensible moving forward. And obviously that's clearly not the case, because I think Washington's prioritizing Tevita pretty highly. I think
I agree.
We both can feel that coming. And the fact that he's going to 2 visits, seemingly, again, love Wazoo with the whole going for the Apple Cup and things like that. But, maybe he wants to see if Jedd can hang on the road. Like I fully, I'm not saying he actually believes that, but just, you can take that angle as you will. But to me, I do think it's worth, keeping an eye on what Wazoo can offer, because if you think about, their advantage in this would be, well, hey, you are our guy. You would be our Derek Coleman Bruce, so you would be the headliner highlight. You'd be the Cody Green, actually, of our class, if you think about it. And again, will that happen? Probably not. No. Again, I'm not saying it's a non-zero chance, but it's like a 0.001 chance. So when you look at it being that game, and then
there's a chance.
I'm just, again, you never want to close the door. You and I both know how recruiting goes, but the fact that he's coming next for Ohio State really is telling.
No, I agree. And that's a big part of it, where it is just kind of the whole in-state vibe like that really does seem to rub off on a lot of kids in this area of, I might as well go see what that's going to look like. I've heard stories of that from countless parents over the years of just, players in state where it's like, yeah, I want to go check it out. I just think that, especially the divide in conferences now, like that's one of the biggest things here. But and especially when you just look at the position he plays, like it's the same thing with Derek in this last cycle. Like, and if Cody Green was still going to Eastside Catholic, we'd be having the same discussion with him, where those are just such critical positions of need. And it's why for weeks and weeks and weeks on the show, we were talking about T.I. Umukais nonstop, even when there was no change in his recruitment status, because that's the player, that's the position that you need. And if you have a guy like that with that kind of skill set right there in your backyard, that is so massive. We got 2 more guys we want to hit on here. The first one being 4-star quarterback Sione Kaho from Lincoln High School in Tacoma. He's set 2 visits now to Washington. And this is a recruitment I'm really interested in. You and I were having a phenomenal discussion before the show. We should have recorded that and, just release it another day, about quarterback preferences in the 2027 class. Washington is clearly very high on Sione Kaho, as they should be. He's a really talented passer. I'm curious to see how this is going to shape up, because, this is why we talked about Tevita first, not just because he's the number 1 player in the state and Sione is number 2, but it's a similar discussion in terms of, it seems like they're locally focused right now, where the 3 schools standing out to Sione are Stanford, Oregon, and Washington. And it's just one of those things where coming up to Washington twice in a month, he's also scheduled to go down to Oregon, is an interesting tell where, maybe some more of these offers come in over the course of his junior season from more national programs and he reassesses things. But as it stands right now, I feel like Washington has a really good shot here.
I do. I agree with all of that because, again, when you factor in Stanford, you mentioned conferences and all that. I mean, they looked atrocious against Hawaii. So I really think it would be a two-horse battle between Oregon and Washington. Both have very interesting quarterback rooms. So to me, it's going to be a case of what are you prioritizing and how are you exactly prioritizing it? Because they do have some other options at the position.
Yeah, absolutely. Caden Jones and Daniel Mielke look like the other two top options at this point. And that's something we're going to be monitoring closely. Before we get out of here, we want to talk about 4-star offensive lineman Reis Russell from Valor Christian High School in Colorado, who has named Washington and Nebraska his two leaders. He set visits to come see both of those schools play games this fall. And I look at Reis and I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up making a decision rather soon, if it's Washington and if he's the guy who is just kind of the first domino to fall for Jedd Fisch, Matt Doherty in this 2027 class.
I mean, I think he will be. I remember vaguely, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't Roger also visit Nebraska shortly before committing to Washington? I just realized what I said is both went to Valor Christian, both offensive linemen, and I think Reis from day one he's been built to be a Husky. So if he's the first guy in the 2027 class, I won't be surprised at all.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the season. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, we're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that little bell down below. So when we post a new show, click that like button as well, as it does help us out a lot. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.